You most likely don't struggle when it comes to playing video games or endlessly scrolling through social media on your phone. I'm pretty sure you could easily stare at a screen and do both of those things for 2 hours straight or even longer without losing focus. But try sitting down to study for just 30 minutes. Yeah, that suddenly feels way harder. What about spending another hour working on your side hustle? That probably doesn't sound very exciting either. Even though you understand logically that studying, exercising, building a business, or doing something else productive will benefit you in the long term, you still choose watching TV, gaming, or scrolling through social media instead. You could say the reason is obvious. One option is easy and requires almost no effort, while the other is challenging and demands real energy and focus. But then there are people who seem to have no trouble studying, working out, or consistently making progress on their side projects, which raises an important question. Why are some people naturally more motivated to do hard things? And is it possible to make difficult tasks feel easier? To answer that, we need to talk about a specific neurotransmitter in the brain, dopamine. Dopamine is often described as the pleasure chemical, but that's not entirely accurate. Dopamine is actually responsible for desire. It's what pushes us to want things, and that desire is what motivates us to take action. If you're unsure just how powerful dopamine is, let me tell you about a few experiments scientists conducted on rats. In these experiments, researchers implanted electrodes into the rats' brains. Every time a rat pulled a lever, its brain's reward system was stimulated. The result was shocking. The rats developed such an intense craving that they kept pulling the lever again and again for hours on end. They refused to eat. They refused to sleep. They continued pressing the lever until they collapsed from exhaustion. Then the researchers reversed the experiment. They blocked the release of dopamine in the brain's reward center. The outcome was the complete opposite. The rats became so unmotivated that even standing up to drink water felt pointless. They wouldn't eat. They showed no interest in mating. They didn't desire anything at all. You could say they completely lost their will to live. However, when food was placed directly into their mouths, the rats still ate and enjoyed it. They simply lacked the motivation to get up and do it themselves. You might assume that hunger or thirst is what drives us to seek food and water, but dopamine plays a crucial role as well. These experiments are extreme, but similar effects can be seen in humans in everyday life. Your brain sets priorities largely based on how much dopamine it expects to receive. If an activity doesn't promise much dopamine, you won't feel motivated to do it. On the other hand, if an activity produces a lot of dopamine, you'll want to repeat it again and again. So what kinds of behaviors triggered dopamine release? Any action where you anticipate a potential reward will do it. But if you know there's no immediate payoff, your brain won't bother releasing much dopamine. For example, before you eat comfort food, your brain releases dopamine because it expects you to feel good afterward, even if, in reality, that food ends up making you feel worse. Your brain doesn't care whether a high dopamine activity is harmful or beneficial. It just wants more. A classic example of this is drug addiction. A person knows that using drugs is damaging, yet all they can think about is getting another hit. Drugs like cocaine and heroin don't just make you feel good, they flood your brain with unnaturally high levels of dopamine, which makes the craving even stronger. Of course, almost everything releases some dopamine, even drinking water when you're thirsty does. But the biggest dopamine spikes happen when rewards are unpredictable. A perfect example is gambling on a slot machine. Even if you've been losing money the entire time, you still expect a big win eventually. You just don't know when it will happen. And in today's digital world, we constantly expose our brains to unnaturally high dopamine levels, often without even realizing it. High dopamine behaviors include things like scrolling through social media, playing video games, and watching online pornography. Each time, we anticipate some kind of reward. That's why we keep checking our phones. We expect a message, a notification, something new. Slowly, we become just like those rats pressing the lever, chasing the next dopamine hit. You might think this isn't a big deal. You might think it's harmless, but that assumption is wrong. Our bodies operate using a biological principle called homeostasis. This means the body tries to keep its internal conditions balanced. When an imbalance occurs, the body adapts. For example, when it's cold, your body temperature drops and you start shivering to generate heat. When it's hot, your temperature rises and you sweat to cool down. Your body constantly tries to maintain a stable temperature of around 37 degrees Celsius or 98 degrees Fahrenheit. But homeostasis doesn't only apply to temperature. It also applies to tolerance. Someone who rarely drinks alcohol will get drunk quickly, but someone who drinks often needs more alcohol to feel the same effect. The body adapts and becomes less sensitive, and dopamine works the same way. To maintain balance, your brain reduces the sensitivity of its dopamine receptors. High dopamine levels become your new normal. This leads to dopamine tolerance, and this is where the real problem begins. Activities that produce less dopamine stop being interesting. They feel dull and unexciting. Motivating yourself to do them becomes much harder, especially when you compare them to high dopamine activities. That's why people often choose video games or the internet over studying or working on their goals. Games feel comfortable and rewarding because they release a lot of dopamine. Meanwhile, reading or working hard produces much less. This is also why people recovering from drug addiction struggle to adapt to normal life. Their dopamine tolerance is so high that everyday experiences can't compete. They become like the rats in those experiments, unmotivated to do anything unless there's a strong dopamine reward. And this doesn't only apply to drug addicts. The same thing happens to people addicted to social media, gaming, or pornography. Once dopamine tolerance gets too high, low dopamine activities stop being enjoyable. So, is there a solution? Yes, it's called a dopamine detox. And by now, you probably already have an idea of what that means. A dopamine detox involves setting aside one day where you completely avoid highly stimulating activities. You stop overwhelming your brain with dopamine and allow your receptors to recover. A quick disclaimer: if you're dealing with a serious drug addiction, you should seek professional help, as withdrawal can be dangerous. For the detox day, you try to have as little fun as possible. No internet, no phone. No computer, no music, no junk food, no masturbation. You remove all sources of external pleasure and fully embrace boredom, and there will be a lot of it. What you are allowed to do is go for walks, meditate, sit alone with your thoughts, reflect on your life, and write down ideas on paper, not digitally. This might sound extreme, but if you want fast and meaningful results, you need to take serious action. Think of it like this. Imagine you eat every meal at the best restaurant in town. Eventually, that becomes normal. A bowl of plain rice would seem unappealing, but if you were starving on a deserted island, that same bowl of rice would suddenly feel amazing. That's exactly how a dopamine detox works. By removing constant pleasure, simple and productive activities become enjoyable again. If a full detox feels too intense, you can start smaller. Pick one day each week and completely avoid one high dopamine habit. It could be checking your phone, gaming, binge watching shows, eating junk food, or anything else. Every week, for that one day, the behavior is off limits. You'll feel bored, and that's the goal. Boredom pushes you toward tasks you normally avoid. Ideally, high dopamine activities should be limited as much as possible. Instead, you want to link dopamine to actions that actually improve your life. One effective strategy is using high dopamine activities as rewards for hard work. This is exactly what I do. I track my low dopamine tasks: cleaning, exercising, reading, practicing piano, creating videos. After completing a certain amount of work, I reward myself with high dopamine activities at the end of the day. The key is timing. I always work first and reward myself later. If I start with pleasure, I lose all motivation to do the hard stuff. For example, for every hour of focused, low dopamine work, I allow myself 15 minutes of high dopamine activity. 8 hours of work earns me about 2 hours of reward. You can adjust these ratios to fit your lifestyle. If you're addicted to something harmful, don't use it as a reward. Choose a healthier alternative that still feels worth it. Personally, my biggest weakness is the internet. I can lose hours there without realizing it. That's why I use this system. Even with it, I still schedule days where I avoid high dopamine activities entirely. To wrap this up, I want you to know that doing hard things can feel easier. But when your brain is constantly overloaded with dopamine, low reward tasks will never feel appealing. Limiting phone use, screen time, and other high dopamine habits is absolutely worth it. If you struggle with motivation, start detoxing your dopamine as soon as possible. Reduce your exposure to artificial dopamine spikes, and normal activities will become exciting again. We are all dopamine addicts to some degree, and that's not necessarily bad. Dopamine drives us to grow and achieve. The real question is where you choose to get it from empty distractions or from building your future. The choice is yours. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you gently tapped the like button. It helps the channel grow and allows more people to improve their lives. Thanks for watching, and I hope this video helped you become better than yesterday.